And we are live with our 59th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome once again. We're really excited today. We've got James Wickett joining us, and he's going to talk to us about all the DevOps things. But before we get to that, it sounds like Matt thinks that we have an echo. Apparently, I don't know whose echo it is because it sounds fine to me, but it's probably Ken that forgot to mute his YouTube stream again. Before we get to that, there's a couple of announcements. Ken and I have mentioned this a couple of times that we're going to be at AppSec Global in Tel Aviv in a couple of weeks. We're teaching our secure code review course. If you're going to be there, reach out. We will have Absolute AppSec swag, right? T-shirts and pins and other things. So if you want any of that, please let us know. Besides that, I don't know if we've got a lot on the calendar outside. I mean, I definitely will be at DEF CON. I'm still doing the Hacker Tracker stuff. Ken, do you have any other places that you're going to be?
I'm trying to unmute because I'm muted because now I'm like self-conscious that I'm causing some sort of echo. Okay, the echo is a lie. We just have like right off the bat.
But we just got trolls today.
Some trolls. It's awesome. Like you brought them out with you, James. So your Austin crew.
Seems to be my thing now.
It's the Austin crew.
No, I seem to just bring out trolls. That's what happens.
Oh, okay, got it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's okay. We'll work through it. No, I think actually Matt really thought it like there is an echo, but I think it's just his audio. Cool. So, what was your question? You asked where am I going to be?
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm going to Austin next. As a matter of fact, I'm going to Austin next week. Going to Tel Aviv the week after. Probably in San Francisco the week after that. A little break, and then I'm going to be in Phoenix. So. Yeah, I'll be around traveling for the next month or so. So it's going to be a lot of travel. And then conference-wise, besides, well, we've got OWASP AppSec Day in October for Melbourne.
Yep.
And I think I'm going to try and make it to. We'll get into this since James is the founder of LastCon. We will. I'm going to try and make it out there. So yeah, it should be fun. But yeah, I think what is there anything you want to cover? Seth for the podcast. Yeah.
Not particularly. I know we owe people T-shirts. If you've been on the podcast and you're listening and we haven't gotten you one, please reach out. Hit us up on Slack or on Twitter somewhere. But other than that, right, let's just dive into the AppSec Minute. The AppSec Minute this week, we're going to take a break from the Portswigger list, and we're actually going to talk about some stuff that Ken did this weekend. He had a blog post on kernel-ownage.attackresearch.com. Had to do with Minecraft. So Ken, let's jump into it. Tell us what you did. Tell us what happened, and why you did it. Right.
For sure. Yeah. So, and if I seem like. So by the way, this morning's tweet with the hey, we're going live at 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, noon Eastern Standard Time. That was me. I'm out of it today. I'll try and do my best. I don't know why, but there's a lot of ums and yahs and not getting time zones correct and whatever. We'll wing it. But this weekend, my wife was sick and we were stuck indoors and it was cold and rainy. And, my son and I, we were just sort of stuck inside. So he wanted to do, I wrote a blog post about this and I'll link to it, but yeah, he wanted to do a Minecraft mod. And the version that's publicly available it didn't have kind of the stuff that he wanted. It was pretty limited. So to get him the stuff that he wanted, I did a little bit of homework. Turns out there's this Patreon. And if you donate $5, you get access to that mod. So we downloaded the mod, or I paid the $5, downloaded the mod. And so the version that I was trying to run has this check inside of it, a beta tester check basically, and also checks to see if you're a dev on the dev list. But anyways, all I know is when I booted it up, it said you're not authorized to use this mod. So I went back to the Patreon page, or like the email I got, and sure enough, it said, well, you need to email me your Minecraft usernames, and then you'll get access to this mod within maybe 24 hours and whatever. Like, I'm skeptical that'll actually ever happen, since I still haven't got responses to my emails from the mod creator. Anyway, so basically, hey, this is a jar that's running locally. I'm sure there's something we can do. So kind of just like to show my son, hey, here's what you do as a hacker. Here's what this is about. I had JD GUI. I took JD GUI, picked apart the mod, looked for the error message, the unauthorized use message, found where it was in the code, and ended up finding that there is a yes, thank you for linking the JD GUI. But I found that there was a check in the code that was going out to pastebin.com to download a list of what looked like GUIDs or UUIDs, or random numbers, right, and letters. So I was kind of like, what are these UUIDs mapped to? Found out there's a website for, and I'm going to find the links here. There's a website that takes your username and provides a UUID, and like vice versa. And so that information is publicly available. So I originally started like decompiling, trying to change the source code and recompile it to get this authorization check to basically not exist anymore. And that was taking a little bit too much time. So I just decided to run my son's Mac over here and my system through burp proxy. And so when the mod loaded up, it would make a request out to pastebin, and then I put a match and replace rule inside of burp proxy, so that I basically one of the UUIDs that came back, I just replaced it with ours, with our UUIDs. And sure enough, that worked. We were able to use the mod. There was no longer this unauthorized use error. So that was kind of cool. And here's the link to that. But even cooler is Matt, who is my coworker, is going to release a blog today. Because I shared the link with him because I know he was huge into Minecraft. So he's going to release a blog post today where he gave me this 20 lines of code. And what he uses is Java reflection. So there's two mods. There's the original mod that has the unauthorized use, and there's the second mod that uses Java reflection to instantiate the classes and then override that method and turn the result into hey, you're authorized. So it's really cool. That's coming out today, and I'll obviously post the links when that's available. But yeah, so the point is use JD GUI to decompile jar files, figure out what all is going on, how they're doing that authorization, and put yourself on the list.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that's very similar to what we do when we're testing, even Android apps, right? JD GUI is super helpful when I don't have source code for Android, because it does tear that apart and give me access to different pieces, and then I know what to instrument with Frida and other things. So it's interesting how it applies. That's all, right? Across the board, it seems like it's the same stuff that we run into, whether it's in free time like Ken, or on the job. So
yeah, I mean, it's it was kind of I kind of wanted him to see it. By the way, nothing against the creator or anything like that. It's not meant to be anything like that. It's meant to be kind of a lighthearted it was a fun story. I got to show my son pretty much what the value is, and knowing how to program, and knowing how to read source code, and knowing how to, basically make workaround. That's what a hacker is, right? We make things work with weird workarounds. So it was a really fun thing. And then I think Matt's post today is going to be really awesome, because it goes a little bit deeper with Java reflection. So it's super fun.
But I love that you took something that was just broken, right? It's hey, let's get this to work.
Yeah. My son thought I was the coolest thing too. He's like, what? How does this work? So it's a good life lesson, learn things, because you'll be able to make things that weren't working work. So yeah, kind of fun. Cool. So I think that's enough for the AppSec minute. I think we should delve into introducing James. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So James Wickett were you the one of or the founder of Lone Star Application Security Conference, last con?
Yep, I was one of. It was me and Josh Sokol.
Awesome. It's one of my top conferences. I think like AppSec Cali, LastCon, and LocoMoco, always touting those as sort of the favorites. You did a great job with that. And that's how, we met, as well as through a OWASP meetup in Austin. You also help with DevOps Days Austin. You're pretty active in the DevOps community. You you speak a lot about cloud security, rugged DevOps, which we'll talk about, and just security in DevOps or DevSecOps, or however you want to refer to it. Your talk at LocoMoco Sec was awesome. Every time I see you speak, you've got great talks. So you're very active in the community. Also, James has a lynda.com DevOps security focused training material along with Ernest. So I'm trying to think if there's anything I left out there. Seth, anything to add?
No, just that I've never been to LastCon, and it's always one of those that I'm like, crap, I missed it again, right? Because I hear from Ken and from everybody else, hey, it's like me and LocoMoco Sec, right? Apparently there was a conference in Hawaii that I missed a couple weeks ago. I don't know if it's been the running joke, but yeah, we'll try and make it down this year, and see how it is. But welcome to the show. I'm like, first of all, let's just, dive into it. I guess you can answer, Matt Konda's rugged question if you want to start with, or we could just dig into your background.
Yeah. Well, hey, Seth and Ken, I really appreciate y'all having me on the show. And for LastCon, it's kind of weird now to think about it, but when we started LastCon, it was because Josh Sokol and I we'd been kind of running the OWASP chapter for several years here in Austin, and we had a security conference that and I struggled to think of the name of it, but it was more like infrastructure disaster recovery type conference. But it would take place here in Austin, then in Houston, then in San Antonio, and it would rotate. And every third year or second year, depending on the rotation schedule, Austin would have a security conference. Nowadays, there's conferences there's conferences all the time in Austin that are happening. But back then, security and even developer conferences outside of South by Southwest were pretty slim pickings here in Austin, which may be hard to believe, but that was that's 2010 was our first one, so it's been a little bit of a bit, right?
A few years, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't help run LastCon for the last couple of years. So we have a really great core team in OWASP Austin that help out with that. And but my wife was like, you run too many conferences and you do too many things. You got to pick some, right? So she's a great
pick your favorites
in my life. So I felt like LastCon had a really good stable base and supporting organization and the ability to kind of run. So I was like, this is already kind of a pretty good, well-oiled machine. And so I've kind of doubled down efforts on making DevOps Days Austin, pretty good, or trying to make it as good as we can.
What were some highlights from DevOps Days Austin that kind of stuck with you this year? Anything that kind of really, any talks or anything that really stood out to you this year?
We had some really great talks over at Austin. One of the things I mentioned to people whenever they're like, hey, what makes DevOps Days Austin different than other ones? Why, there's the DevOps Days in pretty much every major city that you could think of, or within an hour or two driving distance from any place that you could think of here in the US, and then even globally, there's a lot of good options. But DevOps Days Austin, we started DevOps Days Austin in 2012. So also kind of a long bit of kind of running continuous conferences. And our first two talks in 2012 for the keynotes slots were both security talks. It's my friend Nick Galbraith, who is CTO over at Signal Sciences, and then we had James Turnbull, and I forget where James Turnbull's at now. I feel bad about that, but he was over at I think at Puppet at the time, but both were security focused talks, and those really those are really great setup. And then I think every single year since then we've had some security flavor. Well, that also continued this year. We had Wendy Nather come and speak, and I thought her talk was pretty helpful. She had some good nuggets in there. I think that just how GDPR is affecting us, and we will sometimes view it as one of the things I like that she said, that you may have heard her say this before, but GDPR is a good thing because it actually gave us a reason to think about how we're using data. And there was this conference, kind of wind back to something else that I've been thinking about lately. I wanted to see what you guys think of this as well. But I was at a conference for defense, which is this really great art into science conference for defense, free conference. It happens in Austin. I just got able to go to it this year for the first time. But if you guys ever get the chance, it was great. But the room is probably half full of PhDs and masters, folks. And you kind of look around and you're like, oh, I am on the undereducated side of people here, right? It's like every talk's like, well, I wrote this paper and then or read these 5 papers, and you're like, okay, I got some work to do to keep up with these folks. But one of the things we had an open space breakout, and it kind of relates to Wendy's comment about how we treat data. But how do we decide, what to secure, how to lock it down? And one of the premises I raised, I said, well, if you're actually keeping the data, that is a signal that you care about it, and the amount of time you decide to keep it and what data you decide to keep, that's kind of in scope for audit. But we should sort of get more comfortable with treating our digital exhaust as merely that same thing that it is, and just let it go. Let those logs and stuff go that you're not really, that aren't primary for you, right? And you're actually giving, because lawyers and politicians, they have no way to understand what data is important or what's not, or oh yeah, that's just some log files from our, Kubernetes cluster or whatever. We don't really care about that for governance type stuff or whatever. It's kind of a random, we all thought out example, but they have no idea how to determine that. But we as professionals as security and IT professionals have the ability to say, yeah, we think that's important because we've dedicated all these machines and computers and storage and backups and all this stuff to it. And so that's, to them, the only indication that they have. So for us to kind of start treating that sort of stuff as yeah, we only save it for 2 weeks and then it just sort of leaves our infrastructure. So we're sort of kind of creating some of that problem. I don't know. What do you guys think of that? As kind of,
so you're talking about
yeah.
So you're talking about reducing the surface of potential exposure based off of our technical, we know that these logs really aren't useful past whatever. Maybe they're not useful at all.
Could be not, yeah.
But they might leak like we've seen things too where user objects and basically objects in memory, they have certain sensitive attributes exposed to it, especially if it's a model object. And so if you accidentally just print out the entire object in a log, you may get every single association database wise, every single column associated with that model object. So that happens accidentally, for sure. Shouldn't, but could. And so purging unnecessary logs, I think that makes sense. Determining what's necessary is kind of that's more of a, yeah. I don't have a great.
That's hard, but and doesn't that go against Splunk's licensing philosophy? Is they want you to log everything, so you have to pay them more money, right? I would agree because I think about it. You've got your support logs. It does take some discipline to do that, though, right? To be able to say, all right, these are our audit logs, and we maintain audit logs for at least whatever 6 months or a year, and then everything else is support logs, and maybe support logs are only good for 30 days or maybe even 60 days in case somebody needs to go back. But I would tend to agree that there's a window that those are actually useful. And after that, it just becomes, hey, we've got this, gigs and gigs of data that no one ever looks at, that, we use to load into, some sort of a search engine. And, we may comb through it once in a while, but it doesn't really give us a lot of data outside of this historical use pattern or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. I could see that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and it just sort of, we've allowed Yeah, I'm speaking in generalities here, but we've allowed, things like PCI to just be a star across all of our infrastructure and systems, because we haven't isolated and we've kept all the stuff, and it's sort of a question just to throw out there of like how I think we sometimes want to say that the lawyers or the compliance or the audits or whatever, folks are kind of putting this other, undue pressure on us, but then they're kind of seeing the indicators from us and like how we're treating our applications, how we're treating our systems. And then they're just sort of using those as like, oh, okay, well, you think that you're going to keep that stuff for 5 years? Like, here's how you're going to do it. Right. And there's some give and take on this. So the people at the Art into Science conference, we had a long debate about this, no agreement. And so I'm just kind of throwing out the digital exhaust bit here. So.
Yeah. I mean, I would almost say, yeah. And like, okay. So being a consultant, right? Like I know I run into kind of this like assessment exhaust almost, right? It's a form of digital exhaust, but it's also like, hey, I do a code review and it's like, how long do I need to keep around like the artifacts from my testing, from my code review? It's fallen down into like my InfoSec policy that we give to people. And we're like, hey, guess what? After we get done with an assessment, we deliver the final report. We delete all of your data because we don't want to be that point that actually gets exploited and they find your code or they find these vulnerabilities through us. Because that's another risk exposure, right, that we run into. But I think that's what's probably happening on the other side, right, with all those log files. I mean, you think about Splunk Cloud and other things like other storage locations. If somebody else gets access into that and there is that data in there, it ups the exposure. I mean, a lot of those PCI exposures back in the day were, hey, guess what? It would take a credit card at a point of sale system, and then it would just log it locally. And that system wasn't protected. So, you think about the target breaches and other things like that. It's all the point of sale systems. That's what they targeted to actually pull that data back.
So Seth, you Marie Kondo'd your client's data.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to do. And like good life practices in the real world also affect kind of our digital lives as well, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they definitely do.
Who advises those politicians? Is like NIST, people like NIST or something like that that's advising, like when it comes specifically to GDPR, did Wendy talk at all about like who was all involved in giving that advice? What bodies? Is it academia? Is it like I said, a government body like NIST or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that bit. But that's something we should ping Wendy about and find out. I mean, see what she can uncover or other folks,
Note to self, invite Wendy to the podcast.
Invite Wendy, yeah, be good.
There you go.
I'm going to write that down as a matter of fact, so I don't forget.
There you go. Okay.
So and I'll round out a couple things else from DevOps days. We had two other keynoters, which I was really excited about. Damon Edwards, who he started, he had DTO Solutions, which did a lot of like DevOps implementations for large Fortune 500 companies as consulting, and then has now moved into Rundeck, which is their, if you have like playbooks or run books or however you think about that in your organization, but giving, complicated IT actions to anybody in your organization to say, spin up a cluster, turn off a user, whatever, but sort of put those sort of automations in place. And his talk was great. Really kind of just thinking of like how we think about DevOps in the future of that. But then day 2, we kind of had a surprise where we brought in Patrick Dubois. And Patrick Dubois is the guy who coined the term DevOps, had the first DevOps Day Skint, which this is the 10-year anniversary for DevOps here coming up this fall. But he keynoted our second day, and he gave a lot of good advice to the crowd. I felt personally as someone who's been doing kind of developer relations, developer advocate, evangelism type work, he kind of spoke to me for a moment there. He's like, hey, I thought like the way like we're doing all this hard marketing and DevOps, combined work, and that's that takes some real effort. I think, and I felt like just he sort of like went through a lot of the roles that a lot of people that are gaining traction using DevOps, taking part of the ecosystem, and just hit on their future for those different roles and like where we're growing. So even though he told us is like, yeah, and I kind of have I'd asked him to do this at the 5-year mark as well. I was like, tell us about the future of DevOps. He's like, I don't like to talk about the future of DevOps because we have no idea. Like, he's real practical and he's a real humble guy, but we all see him as kind of, we call him the godfather of DevOps, and he also doesn't like that either. But we still do it. So.
What's funny is I think it was like maybe 2013, 2014, you yourself were still trying to get a grip on like what DevOps is. And, in your DevSecOps talk, I feel like you've gotten to a point where you definitely have like a good definition of what DevOps is. I mean, certainly like you covered it pretty well, which like definitely we want to get into. But yeah, again, like back in 2013, 2014, 2015, maybe even, it was still like trying to figure out like, is this a cultural thing? Is it like the tools? Is it both? But yeah, actually, if you could go like, give a little sort of a background on that. Yeah,
if you rewind to DevOps got started through Patrick Dubois and then also Andrew Clay Schaefer. They were at an Agile conference in like 2008, and they were like, let's talk about Agile infrastructure. And there's a whole bunch of background on that. And that meeting went awry and stuff. But then they ended up, there was a talk in 2009 Velocity where John Allspaw gave a talk on 10 deploys a day at Flickr. And that's kind of referenced as the canonical thing that kind of helped kick off the movement. And there's a big like dev and ops working together, heart logo. And then later that year, Patrick said, let's have this thing called DevOps Days. And that's the first time it was ever used kind of in that context and as a thing. We're going to have DevOps Days, and it's going to be in Ghent. And I think 50, 100 people went to it. And this is 2009. So this is 2019. We have the kind of the 10-year reunion. So it's pretty exciting. I'm hoping to go to that. I'm planning on going to that. So
is that Ghent, Belgium or Brussels?
Yeah, Belgium. Yep.
Okay.
And the cool thing about Patrick is he has a lot of background in security. Like we've talked about that several times, but he's kind of in the early 2000s, did a lot of security consulting or work around that. So it's pretty cool. So we do have true ops, a lot of ops guys kind of have security backgrounds as well, or do that. Where was that? So, but I think at that point in DevOps history, Ken, you ask a great question, because Adam Jacobs, who is the founder of Chef, and other folks as well, but like they're kind of famously known for saying DevOps is a cultural movement, period. Like that's it. And then they like 2011, 12, I don't know, we'll get this wrong, but there was the DevOps is a cultural professional movement, or professional cultural movement, or something like that. So we resisted a lot of definitions. Why? Because we saw what ITIL and these other things have done. We've seen how everybody just talks about tools. Even at that time, DevOps equals Chef or Puppet. Now it equals Kubernetes or whatever. And there's just a pushback on that. John Willis and Damon Edwards came out with the CAMS model. I don't remember when, 2012, 13, somewhere in that range, which is it's culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. Then people said, well, what about lean? So you have CLAMS. My good friend Ernest Muller, who we did those lynda.com or LinkedIn learning classes, if you have access to that. We did several courses together on that, but he wrote a post on the Agile Admin, which as far as I know, is one of the most popular posts on like what is DevOps. I think if you just type in what is DevOps, that's your first result, unless some SEO dark magic at in some marketing department somewhere has overtaken us. But Ernest's definition is really great, really thoughtful. It gives both the history of it, talks about how it solves the scope in the software delivery domain. And then there's, the continuous delivery movements have come out, the way that people really kind of grew towards configuration management. Then, Docker, containers, Kubernetes, serverless. We've seen lots of growth in technologies, but DevOps is still held on. Marketing people still want to convince you it's their tool. Their tool is the DevOps answer, and going to make that happen. But I think that the movement is still kind of holding on to that idea, like it's a cultural movement. And I felt that a lot at DevOps Days Austin when we had stuff around people dealing with burnout. We had talks on how to do things like chaos engineering. I think is a real interesting aspect that we're kind of bringing into the fold, kind of through the heritage of Netflix's Chaos Monkey. And then what else is good there? Oh, it's kind of become a thing, but now there is these pay talk sessions. So everybody goes in anonymously, puts in how much they make and their role generically, and then they publish the data locally to that group or to the whole conference, and then you can know, like, all right, I live in Austin. Am I on the lower end of pay things? Am I on the upper end? How many years of experience do I have? Where do I fit? And then they'll have an open space where people can get together and talk about it, ask for advice. Every year we see people's lives change through that, where they're like, I've realized that I'm 30 G's underpaid, 50 G's underpaid, or I'm really doing myself a disservice and I need to go either get a raise or go somewhere else or whatever. So, and to me, that's always a rewarding thing for that to happen with someone either who's a junior developer or who's been kind of in the same job for a while and hasn't had the right, ups for the salary.
Yeah, I feel like that's sort of a hush-hush thing. And I talking about the salary, and I actually got hit up, I want to say it was last week or the week before, by someone who's building an AppSec team or growing the AppSec team and needed to sort of like figure out where current salaries are. And was like, it was pretty like, do you mind? I was like, no, I don't mind. I'm pretty transparent about it, but it is just from the way it was broached. It was kind of like, oh, it's really like sensitive hush hush thing. But I think it's great that people are sharing that information so that you don't find yourself, super undervalued or underpaid. It's definitely interesting. And one of the things you just talked about, which I kind of want to get into, is so like resiliency because like going back to the Phoenix project, one of the big takeaways, it wasn't just like being able to, ship code quickly and iterate. It was also like because you just talked about it with chaos engineering, like the idea that, anything could happen. You could have a deploy that breaks. You could have whatever, something that goes down, database backend, whatever the case is, like whatever technical issue that comes up, you're able to be resilient and come back pretty quickly and not lose service to not degrade your SLA, right?
Yeah.
So, what principles of chaos engineering, do you kind of like, to you are like interesting ways to approach resiliency and like try and test how resilient you are?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that is fit for your organization specifically. And we can look at the Netflix story, right? And we can see Security Monkey when they came out. I remember when it first came out at Velocity conference, and it was like, ooh, Security Monkey, and I think everybody probably knows the origin story, but quickly it's Netflix ran on Amazon. Amazon said, we crash sometimes. Netflix is like, we found out they don't crash very often, and we wanted to make sure our developers were writing things that could withstand when they actually did crash. So Security Monkey goes in and every now and then just turns off machines, right? Not really rocket science development work, and you could write this with a bash shell script and the right key pretty easily. And first gen was similar to that, right? And it's kind of grown into more full-featured version, but even then, not everybody is Netflix. Not everybody is just streaming, House of Cards or something, and where someone can just like hit the play button, again. Like if a stream goes down, we're not that upset. Just like, especially if it restarts, right? You don't feel that same way about your bank or other types of transactions, just naturally how the world works. So there's a great book that I think if anybody's getting interested into this area, Michael Nygaard has a book called Release It. Now, Release It, the first edition, had a lot of great patterns in it, like bulkheads and circuit breakers and like how to do software development and these kind of failover capacities. So you'll have plenty of that those type of components written in there as well. But you want to get the second edition, because in the second edition, he adds the chaos engineering chapter. And in it, he sort of walks in like some, crawl, walk, run type scenarios on, all right, here's what you could do. Here's how you could build up game days. Here's how you think about postmortems. Here's how you deal with failure and building towards that. And, I think in security, we have a heritage of dealing with this. Like there's the CIA, triangle, right? It's confidentiality, integrity, availability. Yet for most of my career, I don't know, probably for y'all's too, but like you don't care about the A. Like the A is like that's somebody else's problem.
Yep.
But in early days, theology of security, right? Like we had this in our mind, right? Like we had this that systems have to be up, right? And I've faced in my career, I faced developers telling me stuff like, you just want machines powered off and unplugged or whatever, right? And you're like, okay, like that shows you think I'm a moron, right? But security does the same thing to developers through rude comments a lot of times, But when we work together, it's like, we work together to assure all those types of components. I know I keep bringing up the DevOps Days Austin. Maybe it's just fresh in my mind. But one of the things Patrick Dubois mentioned was just enough security. Like early days of DevOps, he has a blog. It's called the Jedi, and it's just enough developed infrastructure or deployed infrastructure. I think it's developed infrastructure. So you just need the infrastructure you need to get your job done. You don't name your servers or whatever. You just have these instances run to do the things you need. And we were batting back and forth, but I was like, I think just enough security to succeed. Right. That's all you really need to fulfill mission. Like that's the amount of security you want. Yes, I know it's kind of a ramble there on that.
No, that's really interesting though, because that goes back to the idea of the minimal viable product, right?
Yeah.
Hey, when you're releasing, and I know as a security guys, we have a tendency to be like, no, you need all the things, right? Yeah. And if you don't have all the things, you're not going to be secure. But most of the startups and the small companies that I work with, it's more of a discussion of what makes sense for you, right? If it's just authentication and that's the only like real thing that you need to worry about, let's make sure that's rock solid, and then we can deal with everything else as you grow. But that minimal viable set is very hard to identify, especially when you're coming from a large organization, right? You look at a Google or any of those big ones where they have so many different people that are responsible for so many different security facets. It's hard to take that and distill that down to a 20-person team where you've got 5 developers and some salespeople, and okay, what is it that you're really concerned about? And I mean, so I can see where that's a huge issue, but we don't look at it that way, right? You look at PCI DSS and there is no minimal viable security. It's like you have to have all the things if you want to accept credit cards.
That's right. Here's the minimum PCI, right? There's not like a 10-page option.
Yeah. Well, but in that case though, it's like, okay, so we're going to push that off to somebody that handles credit cards. We're going to go to a Braintree or Square or whatever, somebody else, so that we don't have to worry about it, which works, but it may actually be stifling some innovation for some of those companies, right?
Yeah.
Actually, even that's been like, once PCI realized that everybody's offloading to like Braintree or Stripe or whatever, they have now expanded to like how you handle putting those like, if you're just putting JavaScript components, for example, into your like website, they have like, now they have more, it's still in scope, right? It's now in scopes, and you have to be doing everything right on the side that's including like that JavaScript, for instance. So they got wise to that trick. They're going to get their money.
Hours. They need their bill of hours. Yeah.
So in between, sorry, go ahead.
No. Go for it again.
Oh no, I did want to make sure we actually, sorry, before I go into the next, start asking you some more stuff. Matt Conda had asked, he said, is somewhat eroded, just like what happened with Agile as companies build DevOps teams. Is this an anti-pattern?
Hey, Ken kind of broke up there. Can you say that again?
Sorry. No, it was just Matt had a question that said, I see the idea that the cultural. So going back to the culture of DevOps,
Okay.
he's saying it's like somewhat eroded, kind of like what happened with Agile, as companies are now building DevOps teams. Is that an anti-pattern? I actually don't really understand the question. I think.
Yeah, I know what the question is.
Okay.
Or I'll at least answer the straw man version of the question that I want to answer. How about that?
There you go.
There you go.
That works.
Yeah. Well, DevOps is a methodology for delivering software that really, and you can look at different literature on this, but one of the definitions that I like, or one of the approaches, is its extension of Agile into operations, which I think is a true statement. Why the anti-pattern piece is 2012, 13, 14, there was the job title came out of DevOps engineer. I'm now a DevOps engineer. Now, some people didn't like this, and some people fought this. But then they're like, oh, then they saw their paychecks and they're like, oh, this has like extra money on it, so like I'll take the title, like no problem. I myself was a DevOps engineer for part of my life, because they needed a new way to classify it. Right? Hiring managers said like, I need a sysadmin ops person that's going to be able to do this work. But if I just list sysadmin number 3 or whatever, it's like I'm in this hiring range. If I put DevOps, engineer, whatever, then I can hire something else. But that also gave rise to putting these like they'd have like a DevOps team, and so you'd have your you'd have a bimodal IT. You'd have so there's different options here. You could be running in like this bimodal state where it's like all of our new stuff, we're DevOpsing that. All the old stuff, it's like life supported. You could also have this idea where you have a DevOps team where you take your sysadmins, you rebrand them as DevOps, say here's some Kubernetes, go knock yourselves out, and now you're like still a service team to all these other ones, still throwing over the wall developers interacting with the DevOps team just like they did with sysadmins. The third, and that's somewhat. That's somewhat common, and we see where in that standpoint, like that can be problematic if we think of DevOps as just like this little group of people, not as like we're all participating in it. I would say we do need people that are specialists in like how to run Kubernetes, because guess what? It's not easy. Or managing our Amazon piece, we do need people that are understand how to do the right inspection and monitoring or system level type work. Models that I've found successful is where you take people that are more geared naturally towards like infrastructure and operations type stuff and putting them on teams and then kind of building around the products that we're delivering. I find people generally have more success with that. There's other people I've seen models where they have the DevOps team, but they all rotate inside of different teams that they serve and are a part of. And it's a little more of a fluid type exercise. What we're really seeing give way most in the market is kind of the people have stopped calling themselves, in a large part, for DevOps teams, and they're kind of been the SRE and site reliability engineering, or which Google wrote. There's written a couple books on the topic. And so we're seeing more of a kind of the SRE team arise, where once a product gets to a certain level of stability, then the SRE team will sort of take over responsibility for it. They have certain metrics for it. But those are like larger companies, companies that are really ready to like handle that sort of component. I'm not, super in love with kind of all this delineation, but I do think there is I don't know. I don't know if like that's the breakdown that Matt is speaking of, or we still have lost the idea. We just because we're technologists and because it's easier to talk about code than real problems, it's easier to talk about the latest and greatest, Docker, Kubernetes, whatever it is we're interested in, serverless, and we'll kind of focus and hinge on that technology because, hey, like that's what we like to do. And then I see that as part of the erosion of the DevOps culture, where we're kind of working as a team to deliver software, So we'll see. I don't know if Matt Kondo will accept that definition. But hopefully you two
Well,
guys
I mean, it's what I'd say is that, anytime you commoditize a field, like this happened with, it's happened with software security where, there was this big put back when dynamic scanners could still somewhat do something, before single page apps and all that came along. But there was a time where, brief period of time where dynamic scanners were pretty popular and being purchased heavily. And then they would, you'd have somebody who just basically pointed it at a site, gave some creds, maybe added some macros, and that was like an AppSec software security job, right? Like it went from legitimately understanding software and then what problems arise to like being this field where now it was, for a while, I was noticing that it seemed like it was getting diluted by this, if you can run a scanner, then you're in AppSec, you're an AppSec person. And
but
like, I don't think that
I don't know if I'm on
existed.
the right podcast anymore.
Like I would say that that AppSec, it's not really a thing, I don't think, anymore. I mean, you need to understand software security. And by the way, I'm not saying if you run a scanner, like you don't understand software security. I'm just saying there was a brief period of time where people were getting hired, and I don't know if that's still a thing. I don't think it is. But they were getting that title, and really all it was a generalist security person who ran a scanner.
Yeah.
So to say, I don't want to like say like static and dynamic analysis engines don't have their place. That's not what I'm saying. Like they definitely have their place. I'm just saying that like if that's all you're not. And it would be the same thing as like, like you said with Chef and Puppet, I know how to configure Chef and Puppet. So like that makes me a DevOps expert, right?
Yeah.
And on the DevOps team.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, what I'm basically hearing from you, Ken, is like you feel like you need to be able to learn how to write code, like to be able to be in security.
I mean, yes, let's get on that topic. Let's bring it up. I'm glad I'm glad you raised this topic. This was the huge thing that we wanted to kind of cover. Cause this was, let's back up. So in between, pina coladas by the pool, Matt and I actually, we're attending the conference, and Matt actually,
Yeah.
Did I say Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, James.
James.
I'm reading his responses. Sorry. I'm having a ton of like brain farts today. So whatever. So in between pina coladas, James and I were attending the conference. James gave a talk, and during his talk, he said, he made the statement that, hey, like if you want to be in security, you should learn to code. Now that blew up on Twitter. And I had been asked my opinion at the conference, and like personally, I think it's crazy to say that it's not useful to learn to code, but we would want your expanded thoughts and kind of because that was a heated thing on Twitter. Like people really genuinely.
Oh yeah, I got some email, which I really don't get. Yeah,
you're a super nice guy. You definitely helped the community, but that one thing that you said. That was picked up on, and people just went, like there was little war on Twitter about that. So
yeah, and I put on there, it's like developers should learn how to code, right? The talk is about DevSecOps and like the measure framework, and kind of being a maker and being a part of the kind of a maker community is like the M in the measure framework. And I thought like there's some other things that people might not like or would be controversial or whatever. I didn't think that was actually going to be one of them. I was really surprised. And I even posted like, I do realize that sometimes that is that's not a full opinion that everybody shares just yet, but it's on the slide. It says, develop, what did it say? Something like, security must learn how to write code or something. And then I had two references on there. I had Shannon Leitz over at Intuit. That's what they've done over there. And Aaron Reinhardt, who's now over at Verica, where I'm working at now. But that was whenever he was over at United Healthcare Group. And so both of those security leaders at their organizations were like, hey, guess what? Like, we're going to participate in software development. If you don't know how to write code, like, that's going to be a problem for you. And they both have transformation stories about how they took their security team and really helped them grow, whether it's like Python or Go or Ruby, but helped them like learn a language, add some automation to the pipeline. And it was a really helpful thing for everybody. And they had, and with anything, it's like you get a little bit of pushback, but even the people who gave the original pushback, and Aaron and Shannon would both be great people to talk about this further, but they said, yeah, okay, we're really glad that we learned how to do this. But on Twitter, and at the conference, I thought it was kind of a yawn point. Like, everybody's like, yep, you should. Like, but on Twitter,
well, out of software, when you look at the attendees, when you look at the attendees too, they're all people that like write tools or write code or whatever. Like, so it's like a non-event at the conference. Like for people that weren't there, Seth, for people that weren't there, you said it, and I think everybody was just kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. That's how it went there.
Yeah. Well, so, and that was totally it. Like because I saw it post on Twitter, right? Because all my complete feed was LocoMoco Sec, right? And so I saw it post and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then I came back probably like you guys, a few hours later, I was like, holy crap, what happened? And what's this like reaction that you're getting to it, right?
Well, I will say this, Seth, if you're going to get trolled and people like really upset at you, it's really awesome to do it by the pool, holding a Mai Tai.
That's it. Like, well, at least I can accept. I wouldn't know that, but okay.
That's the best way. I've only had it really happen once where people have been this is the one time when I've ever been trolled, but I was like, okay, like I'm getting some significant pushback here. All right, but at least got Mai Tai in hand. So
there you go.
Were there any arguments on Twitter that sort of persuaded you at all, or was it just like, no, this makes sense?
I think that the main problem is there's two problems, and I think almost all arguments can be resolved by having like people actually explain what they mean in their with like good definitions. So if you spend most of your time like defining the subjects that you're talking about, you could probably avoid it. Apparently, to a lot of people on Twitter, security means everything. Like security means the people who are law enforcement and carrying guns and bodyguards and server room, door monitors. And I don't know, just like, it was like, basically they meant, they went star across IT and physical and whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, obviously I'm talking in a software context. I'm not just saying like that the lawyers need to learn how to write, Python or whatever, right? It's like, that's fine. And I'm speaking more, think of it's more like if you consider yourself a security professional, software security professional. I had some debates with one guy. It's like, listen, like I don't feel like lawyers like identify, like they don't say I'm a cybersecurity professional. They say I'm a lawyer. I do cybersecurity law, right? Like that's a different statement, So one, if you kind of say, who are we talking about? We're talking about people that live in the software world. Two, it's like know how to write code. I'm not saying that we're leading the development process. We're just participating in it. We're much like Ops was whenever Ops kind of got brought into the DevOps thing, where it's like, let's take our systems, infrastructure as code. This is going to be a really great thing for us and developer, and they kind of participated with that. They're checking into version control. They're dealing with all this stuff. I think the same thing needs to happen for security. And so we're not saying that you are, the guy who writes or person who writes all the stuff for the software application, but you're adding in some security components. You're doing the reviews. You're taking part in it, and just being part of the kind of the flow of doing software development.
Yeah, I think, like I said, everybody there and definitely Seth and I on the podcast are like, yeah, that makes sense. If you're going to be like one thing that I always recommend to folks that are like maybe I'm mentoring or giving advice to is when you like explain a vulnerability to a software engineer, is also try your best to write your own, even if it's crappy code, like your own version of the fix. Like crappy in the sense it's like not optimal, right? It's not optimal. Maybe super efficient, and let them roll with how they want to change it. And like that really does work. It gets a quicker fix out, a better fix. But like, if you don't understand, like, I don't even understand how you can find like that issue in code if you're not. It's like saying, I want to find missing issue. I don't want to learn to read or write. Like, that doesn't work. So, yeah, I mean, the other thing too that we have, that's kind of an add-on to your statement there is that, because you brought up like ops, and we're talking about DevOps. Developers are pushing code that becomes infrastructure. I would argue, as a developer, if you're doing that, you should learn networking. You should learn, you should go back and look at lessons learned for networking, and security is a part of that. But I mean, I've seen where in the cloud infrastructure with code that becomes cloud infrastructure, where it's completely misconfigured. And I'm not even talking about from just a security standpoint. I'm talking for like understanding what CIDR is and understanding just basic networking. I don't think that it makes sense with the responsibility of deploying infrastructure to a developer if they have no background in networking. It doesn't make sense, but it happens. It certainly happens.
Yeah, that's right. There is kind of the further, and one of the parts whenever DevOps got kicked off, it was like, okay, developers will now be on call for the systems they maintain and support. And there was a movement of part of the movement was the first fold, I think, was moving sysadmins into this kind of like using development practices to deal with their infrastructure. I think the other half of it is that's the ops to dev. Now then we also have seen the dev to ops thing. It's like, okay, well, now I'm carrying the pager. Now maybe I'm not like a back then chef or puppet expert or a Kubernetes, expert, but like I know how to restart the pods. I could take care of this. I know how our Amazon infrastructure is more or less built or whatever you're running, right? But there is that movement back and forth. And I think security is just another component in this. And this is where kind of the DevSecOps piece, it's like that they're part of the overall story to bridge all this together.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I go back to the whole coding. Hey, if you're going to be doing software security or DevOps, coding is a good thing, right? But I go back to, hey, there's there was the time where I was doing more like admin work for iOmega, like their initial kind of DevOpsy stuff, and like one of the first things I had to do was figure out like how SunOS, like how Solaris worked, right? There's no way that you can like tell me how to secure a Solaris system if you've never installed it, if you don't have an account on it, right? It's kind of that base level of knowledge that you need to be able to operate in the space. And I'm sure that's what you were going for, and that's why we all just kind of nodded our heads and moved on. But it does and then I can also understand the other side where somebody on Twitter is like, well, man, I'm a security engineer that just does firewall rules or security groups or whatever, right? Like, I don't need to know how to code. And, they kind of get up in arms as far as, well, you're telling me that like, I can't do my job on a daily basis. And it's like, no, you didn't really understand the audience and what you were going for here. But yeah, you're right. You have your base level. I understand.
Yeah, and even that person, right? They have to kind of take part in the automation part of the flow, right?
Yeah.
And I think we saw this with sysadmins and operations folks originally when they were kind of sort of getting brought into the coding practices. It's that, well, you may not consider it coding, but like how to configure Nginx that like any developer has no idea, right? Or the secret Apache conf that you've stored all your information on wikis and stuff, but like there's 50 people on the planet that know how to like optimize Apache, and you're one of them. Like, guess what? Like you actually know how to code. It's expressed slightly differently. There's some other toolkits you can pick up that'll be helpful for you. But kind of broadening that definition of what does it mean to participate in the software delivery.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always go back to like shell scripting is coding.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have variables, you have if then else, you've got select statement. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, you're pulling out of a file a list of you've got a file that is a database, like you've got Apache config file. That's a database of information that you are using and manipulating. It's kind of looking at it in a different light. And if you can't discount that from a security perspective, like those bash shell scripts, they run, I'm sure, half the world at this point, right?
Yeah, they work, man.
And they do, right? They're super reliable. They probably aren't versioned like they probably should be, but at the same time, whoever created those and made them stable, that's a development process, even if they didn't recognize it at the time. So I don't know. Yeah. So I guess we agree. Right? That's basically what it boils down to. Is, everyone should learn to code, right?
There you go.
We'll
start round 2 of the but maybe people will talk to you guys instead of me because the Mai Tais are gone. So
yeah, and until I have a Mai Tai, I'm not going to tweet that out. Sorry,
Well, I did have a question. Is so because we didn't really get to talk about your background, and we haven't got to talk a lot about you personally, but I know you're currently at Verica as an advocate and senior security engineer. Is Verica is it stealth mode? Can you talk about it or no? Like I actually don't.
No, yeah, yes and yes. Yes, I was at and we kind of hit around this too, but I was at Signal Sciences and really love the tech over there. And then Aaron Reinhardt, one of my friends, is getting started with Verica, and they're kind of diving into what does chaos engineering and security mean together. And so we're helping large enterprises tackle that question. And I want to do chaos engineering and security type testing in a way that's going to help us build safer systems. And so we're working on that, but we're in stealth mode on that. So it's kind of very 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 early days, but we're excited for it. And I do feel like it's whenever I think about what is the future of security, and to me, the two areas that I really love the most right now, as far as where we're growing, I think it's chaos type stuff, anything around that domain and kind of the overlaps with security. And then the other domain is the kind of the honeypot or deception type tactics that people are doing. So we had the rise of honeypots, a while ago, but I feel like there's the weaponization of deception that is happening now, and I see it popping up at conferences where people are talking about the stuff they're doing, but they're kind of all still hush hush about it. But I think we'll see another rise of companies. And I think this time, because there was a honeypot rise, 5-6 years ago, but I think this time it's gonna stick. So it may not, but I think those are the two areas where I see a ton of growth. So
it's funny when you went up on stage and you're giving your talk. I didn't at the time. I didn't know you had even left Signal Sciences, and there was it wasn't a whole lot. I don't think public at that point that you had switched to Verica. But just real quick, I'm a little hard of hearing I'm a lot hard of hearing in my right ear. And so I typically, especially with audience noise or just noises around, anyways, for about a good solid couple hours, I was so confused and thought you said Veracode. So afterwards, everyone's like, where'd he go? I'm like, I think he said Veracode. I'm pretty sure I heard Veracode. And they're like, no, it's not Veracode. So yeah, there's this whole confusion, and then I'm spreading the confusion at the table, and then, obviously we figured out.
Yeah, and there's there's a lot of things that sound like Verica. When I first told my wife, she had heard of Vericote, I think, and then if you type in verica.com, it's it's something that's not related to us. We're verica.io, and it's just a logo. So it's very mysterious in that sense, but we're the name sort of harkens back to this idea that you had continuous integration, then we sort of built into this idea that we're going to do continuous delivery. Now we think there's continuous verification. And so that's where the name comes out of. So we see that as kind of the next realm where people are going to be going.
Yeah, it sounds like a highly evolved version of your initial work with rugged DevOps, but a very, very much more advanced sort of evolved approach to that with chaos engineering. So I'm interested. We'll keep an eye out to see what all happens once you guys are out of stealth, and sounds really exciting.
Yeah, well, we're stoked about it.
Sweet, awesome. Seth, I know we've gone over an hour here. Is there anything that we need to? Well, yeah. First of all, I think we definitely want to ask where you're going to be that people can, if like they're at a conference in the next 6 months, like what conferences are you speaking at, what conferences you can be at, so that they can talk to you in person if they'd like.
Oh yeah, I'm going to be over at the end of this, or at the first part of June. I'm going to be at New Ops Days in Boston, and so come check that out. And then I'm planning on going to QCon at the end of June, and we're doing a chaos workshop there with one of my coworkers, Matt Davis. So that should be fun. And then I think I'm going to be going to AppSec USA in September. And then the only other one that I can think of off the top of my head is DevOps Days Ghent for the 10-year reunion or 10-year anniversary, whatever, of DevOps Days. That's going to be pretty fun. So if you can come to those, or you're going to be at those, I'd love to talk to you, hang out. And then you can also hit me up on Twitter at Wickett. And as long as this has nothing to do with like security, being able to code, like no more questions on that. Can't do any more of that.
So only questions on security coding. Got it.
Yeah.
That's what we'll put out there.
You got it exactly right. That's great, Seth. Thanks.
Sure.
I think we just got unfriended by James. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Never.
Cool.
Sweet. Well, we appreciate the insight, and you taking the time to come talk to us for a little while. I know we didn't get into your background too much. At some point in the future, maybe when you're out of stealth, we'd love to have you back on to talk through what you guys are doing. From in more detail. Once you can talk about it, but also kind of your background, how you got into security, that kind of thing. It's always interesting for the listeners and for people getting into the industry. So,
all right. Well, this is a really fun podcast, so I'm happy to do it anytime.
Sweet. Thanks, man. Yeah, we appreciate it. Any last minute thoughts? Any last minute like recommendations or anything before we call it for today?
I'm a book guy. I like that Nygaard book that I mentioned. Release it. There's another book that I'm sort of geeking out on right now. It's called Drift into Failure by Sidney Dekker.
Okay.
It's on failure and complex systems. What else might be good? Yeah. Oh, I'm reading a really old book right now as well on the Brooklyn Bridge, and so that's kind of interesting. And one of the quotes, and maybe we could just think about this as an industry. It's like as the bridge was going up, David McCullough's book. It's called The Great Bridge, but he released the 40th anniversary edition recently. But one of the quotes was of newspaper writers at the time when the bridge was getting built. It was like, one of the great things that like future generations will be able to remember us is something that's not the cathedrals. And this is a complete misquote, but it's an idea. But it's not the cathedrals. It's not the places we gather. But it's going to be something that's just utilitarian in nature. That like this bridge is built so well, it's going to withstand the test of time. But it's not our literature or music or whatever. But it's like this bridge is what will stand to talk about our generation, many years from now. And I don't know. I've been kind of noodling on that and just thinking like, what is our equivalent in software? What is it? Is it just the
Perl.
protocols that we build? Yeah. Good.
So you're saying that everyone in security should learn to code Perl. That's right. Like that's, yeah.
Thanks, Seth.
Sorry, man. I like, but no. I like that. I like the idea that you were going with.
I stepped into all that. All right.
Great. Well, yeah. Thanks again, James. Hold on. Don't drop off the podcast quite yet. We'll go ahead and end things. I think, as always, if anyone's got questions, all the links will be on the YouTube live channel or on our YouTube channel or in Slack. Please come join Slack. If you've got questions, you'd like to reach out to me or Ken, or follow us on Twitter at Seth Law, at CKTricky, or Absolute AppSec. So, and follow James as well at Wickett. A lot of good stuff coming out of him too. So.
Yeah, I'm not going to end it quite yet until I put his handle in there. Let me make sure that I get it in there. And that way I can end the chat, and we'll make sure that we've got his handle in there. All right, cool. It's in there.
Awesome.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, y'all.